we all kind of sense that there are forces gathering against the church and have been for a long time. I mean, look at the state of the church. If you hold to the infiltration thesis, you, by definition, think that the forces of the world are gathering against the church. And we are seeing this now more overtly in the secular world. For the last several years in the United States, there have been measures put in place by our dear, dear state saying that you, for instance, people who pray outside of temples of Moloch aren't permitted to really do that. They have to be pretty far away from them. And if they get close to them, they can get into some serious hot water. We've seen that and seen people punished severely for it. But the United States is usually behind other countries on the crackdown on people's right to religious expression. And our main story takes us today to Spain. It's sort of a canary in the coal mine kind of situation there, because as we'll talk about in a second, or a few minutes after Spain, Canada is doing something similar too. So this is coming, if things continue on the path that they're on, to a county or city or state near you, if you're an American watching this. So let's start with Catholic Arena, who doesn't do, I don't think, the story justice, but this is a story that they were putting out here in the last few days. Their headline is Rosary banned in public in Spain ahead of Euro contests. We're now firmly entering that part of the year where that word gets you attention from our hosts. Yeah. But they are correct in saying that it is now illegal in that country to pray the Rosary in public. Apparently, Christians standing in witness to remind the public of God and country and the inseparable link between them is not permitted. They have their reasons for this. So they're brief right up here, and before we get deeper into this. Spain's fan of Marc's government has sensationally banned the public saying of the Rosary in Madrid ahead of European contests. Pedro Sanchez's government has told the organizers of the Daily Rosary in Madrid that they will not be allowed to gather in the city on the 8th of June and the 9th of June due to a day of reflection and the day of the contest. It comes after already fining its leader thousands while praying in public. Catholics have said that they will defy the order. If you're watching this from Spain, live or later, let me know in the comments if you're going to be participating in this act of disobedience to an unjust decree from Caesar, because I'm very curious if this applies to you, if you're going to be one of the ones doing that. And you see here a picture here from that Catholic Arena posted on Twitter of people getting ready, or people praying this outside of one of their parishes, and other people publicly saying they won't be succumbing to this. And that's all well and good, but this isn't new. So we get this article from right around Thanksgiving of last year, where they tell us that the Sanchez rulers prohibit a group of Catholics from exercising their right to pray in the street. This was last November. They really have been doing this for a while now, as you'll see, because it didn't even get enacted in November. It's just that the powers that should not be remind the faithful that they don't have the right to witness to Christ in the public sphere. The article details essentially a takeover of Spain by the followers of Marx. Catholics were praying publicly in front of their parish in reparation and to ask God for help in the country of Spain. The new rulers have, for some reason, decided that they don't want God to intervene, so they banned the praying of the Rosary in public at that time. You see these measures in these places all the time. The further a society strays from God, these kinds of measures always come to the front, even if there are constitutional protections against it. As we'll see in another piece here, what they're doing isn't even legal in Spain, but nobody seems to care. A lot of that going around these days, it seems. But they are banned from praying the Rosary in public. Why? Well, because, again, their state, when it drifts that hard to the left, is always overtly hostile to God. That's not me saying that secular figures on the other side are that much better, but at least they typically leave you alone, which would be a massive, massive improvement. But again, these kind of laws are going to come to your town, your state, or your country soon, if they could find a legal workaround, which they typically do. Again, look in the United States to the temples of Moloch and the zones where your First Amendment rights don't count within like 100 feet or something of the buildings. And how many people get into legal trouble when they go, no, I have every right to honor God and to defend human dignity by stepping closer and doing what we're doing here. Whenever they do that, they get into trouble here in the United States of America. Now, this article again kind of makes it sound like that is a recent story, but it's actually not even. It's recent in 2023, but this is a legal website out of Spain. They say with their headline, "Blow to one of the fundamental rights." Spain makes it illicit and illegal to publicly pray, and that came May of last year. They've been working on this for a very, very long time. One of the most Catholic countries in the world, to drop the hammer on the faithful, to keep them from being able to pray publicly. Public prayer is what they're afraid of. They are, for the time being, okay with you doing it in your parishes and in your homes where nobody has to see you. But in public, that's where they draw the line. Remember at Fatima what Portugal was like at the time that the Fatima apparitions happened. It was a very similar situation as this. I think we tend to lose sight of the political context of the Fatima messages, that they were given in a time where much of this kind of thing was also prohibited, that the rulers of Portugal at the time were actively trying to suppress belief. They were publicly ridiculing the faith, restricting the rights of priests and bishops and the church in general. We have a similar kind of thing happening in Spain today, and it's gone by without a whole lot of people noticing. And I find that actually to be the most interesting part about this. This story is not being covered adequately outside of that country. So they say, again, May of last year, praying the Rosary banned in Spain. A few weeks ago, Spain was gripped by protests against the state due to its deal with the people up in Catalan who don't want to be part of Spain anymore. The opposition of Spaniards was sparked by the plans of the Pedro Sanchez state, which took office thanks to the support of the Catalonians. After winning a vote of confidence, the head of Catalonia's autonomous state, Carles Puigdemont, who heads the group Together for Catalonia, called on Sanchez to immediately announce amnesty legislation for those who were trying to break that part of the country away from Spain. He threatened that if the new regulation was delayed, the party would vote for the resignation of the government. As part of their peaceful resistance, a number of Catholics decided to organize a prayer demonstration in front of one of Madrid's churches. Soon more people joined the prayers. The event, which was broadcast worldwide, attracted international attention. This, in turn, aroused the concern of the Spanish authorities, who sent the police against Catholics praying the Rosary. And then, of course, the police started to bother the faithful all throughout this. But that failed to extinguish the spirit of resistance amongst Catholics, and the incidental gathering turned into a regular prayer meeting, one that's been going on since that time. That's what this is about. They've had this going on for a year, and now they've got some big contests coming up in June, right here this month, 5 days from now, and they don't want this happening. The position of the authorities remained firm to the extent that a ban on public prayer was imposed. Despite the ban, Catholics continued to meet for prayer. Last week, the first fines were issued by the state. The reason given was that the organizers had missed the deadline to apply for a prayer permit. You now need a prayer permit in that place. Sound familiar, by the way? That kind of thing happens in America already. Participants in the prayer meetings, even before the ban, faced the use of force by the badges. They were repeatedly detained, they were harmed, and they were threatened with fines. During the actual legal proceedings, the Catholics will be represented by the organization Christian Lawyers. The association stressed the fundamental rights to religious freedom, to publicly profess one's faith, as well as the right of assembly have been violated. But that's not all. Not only are they cracking down on this, they're actually stripping religious symbols from the state. They've removed all of them. Again, this is a historically Catholic country, not just a Catholic country. Historically, Spain was like one of the most Catholic countries. We think of France as being, like a crown jewel in Christendom, and England before the Reformation being Our Lady's dowry, but Spain was one of the most Catholic places in the world and directly responsible for spreading the gospel to the New World. And now look what's become of them. For students of history, you know that this was happening in that country beforehand, but in a much more brutal way, up until the 1930s when things went really badly for the Hammer and Sickle Brigade. But now they've returned with a softer approach, but still with the same goal: the elimination of the faith in the public life of Catholics there. And they did this by removing religious symbols from public spaces, as well as making sure Catholics can't pray in public. On the 3rd of February 2023, on the initiative of the ruling party, the Congress of Deputies passed an amendment to the Penal Code introducing criminal liability for praying outside temples of Moloch. Sound familiar? That's happened in America already. According to the amendment, anyone who prays outside of one of these places will be liable to be taken by the state for 3 to 12 months. The U.S., it's actually, I believe, worse than that here in America. Punishment will be amendable to community service of between 31 and 80 days. You get the idea. This has actually been ongoing. And back in 2017, political groups on the left tabled a motion to remove religious symbols from the Senate and called for a ban on invoking God when taking the oath of office. They were resisted at the time. In April 2021, local authorities launched grassroots initiatives to remove crosses from public spaces. I'm going to give them a little tip here. It's not grassroots if anybody from business or the state are the ones organizing this, or even political parties. That's not grassroots. That's what we call astroturfing. If you're not familiar with the term astroturfing, it's a fake movement meant to look like a grassroots movement. That is by definition what astroturfing is, and that is what they were doing there. The powers that should not be were organizing and creating the illusion that this was a bottom-up movement to remove symbols of the faith from the public places of a traditionally Catholic country, a country that until the 1970s was a declared Catholic country by the state, until the Vatican started sending the nuncios to the various countries that we had these declarations and told them to undo those declarations. It's a little bit of Catholic history that most people don't know about, that it was the Vatican that actually got several Catholic countries to essentially denounce being officially Catholic. And they've reaped the whirlwind for it. But this is not the only places. See, silent prayer, what's going on, praying in your mind, is also banned in Australia, Great Britain, and Northern Ireland. In recent years, several countries have considered adopting the so-called buffer zones around those places. Australia was the first to introduce them. Well, I don't know if Australia was the first. I'm pretty sure America has had them since before Australia. In Northern Ireland, the ban, depending on location, applies within a radius of 100 to 250 meters from the center, where ritual offerings to demons are performed. Apart from prayers, even conversations about the topic are prohibited in the zone, as well as handing out literature or materials with a contrary message. You get the idea. This happened also in March 2023 in Great Britain. This is a problem that is growing more and more across the Western world. Peter Coleman says, pray the Rosary for Spain. I'm going to ask you before we move on to Canada, how people would feel about this week offering your Rosary in solidarity with the faithful in Spain, who are making a much bigger sacrifice than whatever your normal intentions for your Rosary might normally be. They are the ones who are going to stand up and say no to these prohibitions. Please keep your rosaries if you can. Offer your intentions for those efforts in Spain. And also, maybe offer an extra rosary if you have the time, another 5 decades. Do the full 15-decade rosary every day if you can. Praying in your mind, or you out of your mind. Yeah, no, they banned that. They banned that. I remember a story in Great Britain of a woman who fell into the baleful eyes of the state for doing that, because it was a literal crime of the mind that she was guilty of. Now, if you think that can't come to North America, this is what's going on right now. Headline from the Washington Times. Canadian measure would remove free speech protection for quoting the Bible and sacred texts. What they're doing there is very simple. They're saying that mean speech, kind of speech that they blame for certain offenses involving the word hate. Got to be careful with that one here. They are making it now so that you cannot use your fundamental beliefs, core religious beliefs, as your defense for this. And I guarantee you this will not be enforced equally across the board. It will be Christians of all stripes, probably especially Catholics, who reject what's going on in this month in the world, will be the ones who are the most targeted by this. It certainly won't be the new Canadians who tend to kneel in prayer towards a place in our 2,000, 5,000 miles away 5 times a day. They won't be the ones who this will be enforced against. I guarantee you they won't be. So here's the article. Here's from the article. Quote, legislation introduced in Canada's Parliament would eliminate the use of belief in religious text as a defense against mean action offenses. Repealing the exemption in Canada's law books could make bad sermons and messages using the Bible or other religious texts as the basis for critiquing other theologies or addressing issues such as redacted, critics warn. One of the leaders of the minority Bloc Québécois party submitted the private member's bill, defined as a measure not sponsored by cabinet minister or parliamentary secretary, in November and again last month. The measure received an initial reading in the lower chamber, but no action has followed. The author said when he introduced the bill that its purpose is to allow authorities to go after a very specific kind of speech targeting very specific peoples who are always protected. The measure is needed to refrain from giving inappropriate and undue privileges to people within a society who use them to disturb the peace and harmony, especially if those privileges enable people to sow mean thoughts and wish bad things upon others based on a belief in some divine power, he told Parliament. Note that phrasing, on a belief in some divine power. So you get very, very hard-pressed to find a more insulting way to describe beliefs that people hold so dear to them that will transform their lives and govern how they run their lives than to describe it that way. What's even worse is that 2/3 of Canadians who were surveyed in February support the measure. What you're likely going to have happen is that this is probably going to happen and be passed in much the same way. A similar act was passed in the United States with broad bipartisan support just a month ago. So this is coming to a country or a parish or a county or a city or a state near you. They are wanting to crack down on people praying in public. And there's not much, I don't think, that we can necessarily do about it except maybe make our voices heard in our own contest coming later this year. DM says they don't like Christianity. Well, they don't. Again, like I say, they're not going to enforce this across the board equally. That's never how this happens. Go look in the UK, where somebody says something mean on social media, and they figure out it's somebody from who's we'll call them traditionally British, and they go after them. But if somebody else from one of the new British groups says something, they let it slide. It's usually how it works. Damien says, pray the full 15 every day, offer the joyful in the morning, sorrowful in the afternoon, glorious in the evening, storm heaven with prayer and sacrifice. That is something everybody should be actually working towards anyway. Remember, the 15-decade rosary is usually what the saints referred to as when being told to pray the rosary. The 5-decade rosary most of us pray every day, that was considered the children's rosary. So that's what was expected of children once they reached the age of where they have to go to confession. My mind's not working perfectly right now, but that is what kids were expected to do with 5 decades. Adults were expected to do 15 decades a day. And so whenever you see a message from the saints at a Marian apparition talking about praying the rosary, that's probably what they're actually talking about, is spending 45 minutes throughout the day total praying the Rosary, in addition to whatever little office you might do, like I do with the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary. We're going to wrap this up here in a second because storms are rolling into my area. Nothing to worry about, but may lose power. That's just normal how it goes. So any final thoughts in the comments, please? Most Serious says that we should all also hold to the Holy Face devotion, and I tend to agree with that. If you have the ability to, only so many devotions a person can do in a day, but you should do that. If you have not watched my live stream from yesterday on the Sacred Heart, it's the remedy for the evils celebrated in this month, you should do so. There's another devotion you should consider, especially since First Friday is coming up this Friday. You should consider that as well. The graces that come with it are so profound that they cannot be denied, and that everybody should try to keep them at least once. It's just hard because you have to do 9 consecutive First Fridays. It's a bit much for a lot of people, but the discipline that you gain from keeping that and putting God first on Fridays will bear a great deal of fruit in your life. All right, folks. Ozzy, last week I replaced my router. That's what I had to do. So yeah, I haven't had any lagging in like almost a week now. Thanks be to God. But thanks very much for tuning in today, folks. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.